We're in a good mood here, and welcome back to Gateway of Atonement. It's wonderful to have you. We're looking at a beautiful chapter which talks about reconnecting with God. And if you watch this class and learn with us, you'll learn about how when we reconnect with God, you can actually retie the rope that connects you to God. And then by the end, when you've done that, it has certain qualities that we're going to learn about. So a beautiful image you can learn as we get closer to the holidays or any time of the year about retying the spiritual rope that connects me with God. Beautiful section of this chapter. We've been looking at two different images. One was the idea of this higher level of atonement. And that level, the image we use to enter into it, is that God breathed our souls into us. Unlike the world, which God speaks into existence, God is actually breathing from deep within God's essence for my soul and your soul. And if we do the process of higher tshuva, then we can reconnect to that level of what our breath was like, not after God blew it into us, but even before. So God had in mind, I'm going to blow a human breath into the human body, and God went, right now, our breath was inside God, a part of God, so one with God that it was just God. And so we can experience that oneness again through this process of the higher level of tshuva. And that was 2 classes ago. Feel free to go review if you haven't learned with us. And then secondly, we learned we can have an experience of actually kissing God, connecting our lips to God's lips, like you'd kiss a grandchild, like you'd kiss a partner, like you'd kiss a beloved. And that is because when we say the words of Torah with this feeling of closeness, this understanding that it's one with God completely, our lips touch God's words, touch God's lips, and it's actually God in book form that we're saying. It's not just something God wrote. So we can actually have the experience of kissing God, and how beautiful when you watch a bar mitzvah, when you chant Torah, when you learn to know that you can actually have that experience of closeness. That's part of tshuva. I want to pick up where we left off and just remind us of a few basic concepts. The way that we get into this wavelength of higher level tshuva is by understanding that God and the Torah are completely one. So if I'm connecting to the Torah, and I'm aware that it's not like God just wrote the Torah, God and the Torah are completely unified, they're completely one from every angle. Now, when I'm learning Torah with that in mind, I'm unifying with God. And as we learned, that's my thought, my speech, my actions, all those can be unified with God through considering halakha and Torah, through speaking words of Torah and halakha, and through doing in particular tzedakah, but all the mitzvot really. And second, we need an emotional component. And that is, I'm not just learning because I want to be smarter or more clever, because I enjoy it. I'm learning with a sense of awe that I'm now connecting to the source of the universe, and a sense of love that I'm connecting to my own source, the source of my life, of every quality I have. And that love and awe, if it infuses the learning, now I can enter into that state of higher level tshuva. Of course, as we said, normally the lower level of tshuva has to come first. I can't just jump to this, although there's a little caveat for our generation we'll get to at the end of the class, God willing.
Cantor, is it also Tanakh, the whole Tanakh, not just Torah?
Correct. The question was, am I talking about just the 5 books of Moses or anything in the Tanakh? In fact, any part of the Torah. So the most powerful way of connecting in this manner is actually from halakha. So if you learn Shulchan Aruch, that's actually considered the best way to do it. So all of Torah, we're talking about the 5 books of Moses, the Tanakh, Talmud, Mishnah, Gemara, writings, the Tanya that we're learning, all that. We can enter into that flow if we recognize that right now that is God, and B, generate a sense of love and awe with my intellect. And to review, why is it so important that I generate that love and awe with my intellect? Didn't we learn that I have a hidden love anyways? It's because that natural love that we have is animal, instinctive, it's there as a knee-jerk gut reaction. That's not really nullified. That actually is who I am. It's my identity. So I'm always a part of it. right? We learned I have a love that's hidden inside, and it flares up if I think I'll be separated from God. Why? Because that's who I am. I don't want to be separated from God. And that emotional realm always has a little bit of that me in it. It's me experiencing emotions. To do this, we have to get me out of the equation completely. For that, I need the quality of intellect. Intellect has a quality of bitul, of surrender, bitul, self-nullification, right? When I have an emotion about something, it's me more and more as the emotion grows, and there's more me in that experience. If I have an intellectual journey, if you've experienced, you can go into something intellectually, you kind of get lost. What you're connecting to is kind of outside yourself. There's a truth to it. The intellect has a quality of self-nullification, and so those emotions that we generate through intellect, through saying, wow, God exists and there's no world from God's perspective, and that fills me with love and awe, and I meditate on that, and I generate emotions. Those emotions have the same surrendered quality that intellect has. And so it's those emotions, love and awe generated by my mind, that allow me to experience the higher level of tshuva. But they have to be there. I can't be just learning dry. I have to be learning with love and with awe. Does that make sense? And that really is the higher level of tshuva, right? Once I've done my apologies, once I've truly said to God, I'm not going to go back there, I'm not going to do that again, now I can approach tshuva with a sense of joy because, wow, now I'm returning back, not just, as we said, to the state when I was born, when I was like a tzaddik, but to the state of my soul before I was born, when I was completely one with God. And the quality it creates is that every aspect of my soul, as we learned last week, is completely in touch with God, because that's how God is. And I'm no longer doing the right thing because God said so, and so I have to resist myself. I'm just doing the right thing because that's what God wants in the world. I'm thinking godly thoughts. I'm thinking thoughts of Torah because that's what comes from God. Every one of my faculties of my soul, we went through intellect, emotions, thought, speech, action. In that state, it's all just flowing with God, nullified to God, and that's an entirely higher level than even being a tzaddik is over a Beit near Russia. Any questions about that before we dive back in?
So after you've reached this higher level of tshuva, do you no longer worry about that sin that you created to brought you to that level?
So we will learn that there's a process of always keeping your sin in front of you, never completely forgetting that it's there as a that could trip you up. But you don't want to keep it in front of you like, oh my gosh, I sinned. Not that. That was the lower level of tshuva. Want to keep it in front of you like, hey, I'm human. I certainly could have a pitfall and fall back there. So you don't want to just forget and imagine you can't sin, but you no longer have to really break your heart over it, because if you've done that work properly, God's forgiven you. Now, hopefully, you won't go back there.
I was studying with another rabbi yesterday. We're talking about the sin of David, King David.
Yeah.
Okay, and then after he repented, but he felt bad about it his entire life. He never forgave himself, basically.
Well, because the line comes, King David says, I keep my sin always before me. That's the line. We're talking about that line, right? Yeah. So it depends what you're talking about, okay? If you're talking about that you don't want to assume that you can't sin, because that's a dangerous state of mind, yes, he never really forgave himself. He always remembered that he had sinned.
Even though he reached a higher level of Jew.
Yeah, but you'll see, that this is coming from the Alter Rebbe, I suspect, that conversation. You'll see that it's not like he never forgave himself, like he woke up every morning and said, oh, I'm a terrible person, and that was his identity. He never forgave himself, and we'll learn this in the future, in that he kept that in front of him, but kind of at a distance as a reminder, not on his heart. I think that conversation came from chapter 11, and we'll get to it. Any other questions about just that summary? And if you're watching online, I will review the comments, so I would love to have conversation and comments from anyone learning on your own with us. So I'll be checking those. Love to get questions from you as well. So let's pick up 268. I know we were at 269. Let's just review a little. So here, the Alter Rebbe goes through the experience of being united with God once you're at the level of higher tshuva. So our thought is united with God's, our speech is unified with the word of God, which is halakha, as in, I've placed my word in your mouth. So that was really the image of the kiss. And our deeds should also be unified with God's deeds, specifically through charity, to revive the spirit of the crestfallen, right? And this is, we talked about it a little, the kind of tzedakah that we want to do to really connect with this level is not so much the regular tzedakah that we give or tzedakah we give because something moves us. It specifically is tzedakah that you give to someone that, we'll say, has nothing, right? And that's both physically and emotionally. Physically and emotionally. So someone might come and do an appeal. I see an ad on TV and I think, oh, what a cause. It breaks my heart to see that in the world. I'd have such a good feeling helping them. I'm going to give generously, and I give. And that's a great thing to do. It's a wonderful thing to do. But there's a bit of myself in that. Whereas, if I'm driving down the street and I'm on the highway, and there's a person with a sign, and I can see the person from their motions is maybe not someone that I'd have a good time talking to. It might be distressful, right? And I roll down the window, and there's just, it's an irritating thing for me, perhaps personally, and it's not something that I want to do. Giving to that person, or if you've walked around a big city, there's often people that will come at you, and they're not mentally well, and they're not fun to be around physically. They've been on the street, and they don't just want to get $5 or $10 from you. They want to kind of connect with you and spend some time. And everything about you, that is not like that commercial that moved me, where I say, oh, I'd love to give, it feels so good. That is like, I don't know if I want to be connected to this person. I got somewhere to go. Where's this going to lead? What? Giving when it doesn't feel good, giving to somebody that emotionally you want to back off, that is the best kind of tzedakah to do.
That happened to me yesterday, actually.
Happened to you yesterday.
I was at Starbucks outside, and a homeless person came up and asked for money.
Yeah.
And I gave him $1, and he says, "That's all you have?" I said, "Yeah, that's all I can give you." And he started to have a conversation with me, and I said, no, we're done here.
Yeah.
I was very uncomfortable.
Yeah. So now look at that tzedakah, right? In my mind, I'm like, that's not the kind of tzedakah I want to give, maybe. It doesn't feel good. Where's it going to lead? The guy gave me a hard time. But that's exactly the tzedakah. Emotionally, I got nothing, right? The person,
I got scared.
it's a person, yeah. It's a person with nothing, so to speak, in that I didn't even have a good feeling. They didn't have that to give me, right? Imagine being this person, and everyone that walks up is like, I'm going to have a hard time. I don't even want to I'll leave the money on the table and walk away, I'd rather, right? But you connected, you spoke to the person. That is the tzedakah that emulates God. Because for God, all of us is that person times as much as you can imagine, right? Every one of my foibles, every one of my weaknesses, and God's perfect. And here God's coming and giving me intelligence today and life and a chance and a soul. And God's like, here, I'm going to invest my own breath in you, Michael. And I'm so much further from God than we can imagine any two humans would ever be, right? So when I reach out and I give tzedakah in that way, that is the best kind of tzedakah at the level of tshuva ilah, higher level tshuva. So look out for those. We should value those.
Take a right down. Take a right down to that one.
No, look.
We're going to wait for chapter 11.
Okay. All right. As the verse states, for 6 days God wrought, as explained elsewhere, right? And this is here, it's a whole deep idea that when God created the world, God was lowering God's self. Like we said, if a king was in a palace and the king heard that there was a well in a village somewhere that had broken, and the king's like, okay, fine, everybody wait here. And the king took off the king's robes and put on normal clothes and went and got a hammer and went and fixed the well, whatever it takes, and then came back. Everybody would be like, what are you doing? Why would you lower yourself to go and fix the well? Send a messenger to hire a servant to go fix the well, and it's done. You've got other things to do that are more important. Stay in the palace. The king would be lowering himself to go and take care of something so mundane. Likewise, and to infinite degrees more, when God created even the heavens and the cosmos and the oceans and all the creatures, that was God's infinite, and God's dealing with some finite reality. That's such a lowering of God's self. And so everything God does in relation to the world is that charity, giving to someone that has nothing. And then Shabbat, and this is a beautiful piece we'll get back to. Shabbat, when it says God shavat v'nafash, God rested and refreshed, however you translate, it really means God returned to God's self. God returned to a state where God's just infinite, and it's not that God had to rest because God was tired, right? People think you explain creation to kids and they're like, oh, God was out working 6 days and making stuff and this, and then God's like, phew, let me kick back and relax now. Boy, that was a lot of work, right? This is God, right? God got tired from creating a non-existent world.
I think it just means ceased.
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 Yeah.
Yeah.
But
that's
not ceased as in that it was hard to do and God had to
Right.
stop doing anything.
Just
And also not
ended.
ceased in the sense of now God retracted to God's true self, right? And that is also connected to this state of tshuva ilah, because as we'll see, the idea of Shabbat is also that of tshuva ilah, and as well the idea of the 10 days of repentance, the 10 days of awe, are the idea of tshuva ilah. And I want to get a little more into that as we get close over the next few months. V'zohi, topic 269, v'zohi dabkut derucha berucha betaklit hadvekut v'hayichud kshehi mechamat ahava v'chulu. Go ahead, Rick.
This is the cleaving of spirit to spirit, the ultimate attachment and union that results from love.
So that is the state of higher level tshuva, and you can see why it's characterized by joy and not by grief and crying, because lower level tshuva was apologizing or repairing. Higher level tshuva is now, well, if I'm like God's breath before God breathed it out, that's a closeness with God we should celebrate. Now the Alter Rebbe, 269, answers a question from chapter 4. I'm sure you all remember keenly. And that is why the Alter Rebbe mentioned a few sins that you need tshuva ilah to repair. And one of them is, I'll get a little colorful here, so, trigger alert. If you're not into graphic sort of conversations, maybe, skip to the next class. But the spilling of seed. So the spilling of seed, we'll use that euphemism. And that in particular needed tshuva ilah. Lower level tshuva would not repair the spilling of seed. So if I do that, and I say I apologize, I say I'm sorry, I come to Yom Kippur, etc., then somehow you need something more than that. So he didn't really go deep into it, he didn't explain it. We're going to go in now why it is that is the case technically, and also spiritually why that makes sense and how that actually connects well with everything we've learned. ולפי שפגם הברית בהוצאת זרע לבטלה.
Since the violation of the covenant through wasteful emission.
ואין צריך לומר בעריות או שאר איסורי ביאה דאורייתא או דרבנן.
To say nothing of incestuous relations or other unions prohibited by the Torah or the sages.
This is not just the spilling of seed, but if I marry a daughter and a mother at the same time, if I there's a list of relationships that are inappropriate. So if I engage in any of those, that actually is of the same level. Ki chamurim divrei sofrim b'chulu.
For the words, that is, the prohibitions of the sages are more grave than even the words, that is, the prohibitions of the Torah.
So what do these category of sins do? Pogem b'moach.
Causes a blemish in the mind.
And do one more. Lachen tikuno hu deyitasek beoraita demechochma nafka.
Therefore, his rectification is secured by engaging in the study of Torah, which derives from wisdom.
Right, so what is the idea here? If I eat a cheeseburger, right? I eat a cheeseburger, or I eat bread on Pesach. I couldn't help myself. The challah smelled so good, right? It's physical. The sin is physical. Yeah, it cuts me off from God. It so-called snips the rope that we're going to be discussing, and then my connection for God is lost. But really, it was a physical act that I ate it. It was my physical appetite. I really probably didn't think about it a ton beforehand or a ton after. It just, my urge overcame me. I ate it, and it was done. And then I did tshuva. These acts of spilling seed and acts of inappropriate relationships and all the rest, and in our generation with online and pornography, this thing is really not just a theoretical issue. It really is something that a lot of young people have to deal with, and people generally have to deal with. So when I engage in one of these sins, if I think about it, it's not usually the kind of thing where I saw it on a plate, I ate it, and now it's done. And so usually there's ruminations, there's images I have in my mind, it's something I think about before, then I want it again, I think about it after, it involves a relationship, it involves a million things, right? So even psychologically, eating the bread on Pesach, that pretty much stays here. But any of these inappropriate relationships or inappropriate breaking the covenant in that way, right? That actually, it really infects the mind. And especially if you see the effects of pornography today, you see that people just, their brain can't get enough of it. They go back, they become addicted. And that means it's gone up here, right? It's caused a blemish not just in the layers of my soul that deal with emotions. It's caused a blemish in the layer of my soul that deals with intellect and even chokhmah itself. So that's why it makes sense. If the blemish is higher up such that it's affecting chokhmah, then mida keneged mida, like measure for measure, the repair has to reflect what the issue was. So the issue is it's actually now creating a blemish, creating a defect in my intellectual flow. So the repair is learning Torah and connecting to God with God's chokhmah, with the emotions that chokhmah has created. Right? So just doing normal level tshuva doesn't reach up high enough. Right? Normal level tshuva, I'm sorry, I'm emotional, I want to be better, I promise I'll be better, I apologize. It's all here. I'm working with the heart. But this has touched something in the mind. So for that I have to reach up higher, and it's tshuva ilai is what reaches up to that level of my soul. So it really makes sense that is the only way to truly repair the blemish of this whole category, because it doesn't stay just in emotions. It really does clamp onto the mind and change the flow of the intellect. Make sense? Very serious. We're very serious. It's a real thing.
I keep thinking about how many incestuous relationships there were on the Torah prior. They're
incestuous.
Incestuous, yeah.
Well, some of them, the early generations were allowed to marry from within their family because they had to get a Jewish soul path type person, right? But some of them really were a problem. Yeah. But nowadays, you can't marry your parent, your sister, your whatever.
Those were examples of the problems that were created by those relationships.
Yeah, depends which ones we're talking about. Yeah.
Oh.
We therefore find v'zehu shekatuv betana devel Yahu Adam avar avera v'nitchayev mita lamakom ma yaseh yichyeh.
Is that me?
Sure.
We therefore find in Tana Deve Eli, I don't have my glasses, Eliyahu. Sorry. A man commits a sin and is liable to death before the Almighty, for the above-mentioned sin carries with it the punishment of death by divine agencies. What shall he do and live?
So now we're going to see an actual, because is this a chidush? Is this a new idea the Alter Rebbe just dreamed up that, normally tshuva is apologizing and saying you're sorry, but we're going to do tshuva by studying Torah. So I say, well, where in the Torah does it say studying Torah does tshuva? Studying Torah is good, but what do you base this on? So here, if I commit a sin and I'm liable to death, like one of these big deal sins, im haya ragil ikrot daf echad ikra beit tapim nishnot perik echad yishne beit prakim v'chulu.
If he was accustomed to studying one page of the written law, let him study two. If he was accustomed to study one chapter of the oral law, let him study 2 chapters.
Right, so here, the cure, the tikkun is that I double the amount of Torah that I study. If I study 1 page, I should do 2. I study 1 chapter, I should do 2. So already we have an idea of doubling here, which is going to come into this image of a rope that we're moving into. So the author says, "V'hayinu ki mshal chevel hanifsak v'chozer v'koshro."
This resembles a rope that is severed and then reknotted.
Right, so here he said you have to double your Torah studies, and now he's talking about a rope that's severed and reknotted. So I have here a little demonstration. Found a nice piece of rope.
I love your demonstration.
I hope that when I go camping, my tarp is not just this far from the branch I need to put it up on, because I cut it off of the tarp. So we'll see when I go camping. A lot of great stories connected to this rope here, but we'll use it for our class. So Jacob is the rope of God's inheritance, right? We've used that line, Jacob is the rope of God's inheritance, to understand the image that when I look at my soul, here at the bottom of my soul, it's Michael Smolash's intelligence, Michael Smolash's emotions, Michael Smolash's thought, speech, and action. But that's the bottom of the rope. That's me connected down here. But if I could journey up my soul, and that journey is a journey of more and more awareness that God is one and that there's only God here, then at the top I recognize that my intellect is just a glimmer of God's intellect and is flowing from it. It is one with it. Right? My emotions are something that flow out of God's emotions. And we learned about the 10 sefirot and how really everything in our soul is just a reflection of the oneness with God that every one of our souls reflects. And as well, thought, speech, and action. Those powers, it feels like it's just me down here, but if I were to journey back up my soul to have the experience of a soul not in a body, it's just like looking at water and there's many waves, and that's this one wave, but it's all ocean. Right? It's not like that's me and I'm separate. It's ocean, and that happens to be the wave that is me right now. Right? So difficult to do. There's practices we've learned to do it. But for now, we're talking about, I know that rope is connecting me, and it's a beautiful image. And as we learned, if I tug down here by spilling seed and by lying and by doing other things, what happens to the top of the rope? When I pull down here, what happens to the top? Do I feel it?
Disconnected.
Yeah. So we learned tshuva is, if I pull down hard enough, that hay can get disconnected. And now when I do tshuva, I reconnect it. We also learned, however, that when I do a sin, I get a little nick in my rope, right? So, a little sin. You can barely see it. It's still fine, right? Still fine. And then I do another sin, and it gets another nick in the rope. Maybe this one's a little bigger. Now you can see a few pieces are coming off here if you're doing a close-up, right? But then I do a big sin, and what happens? Big sin is just basically...
Good scissors.
This is working great last night when I tested it. There you go. So I'm now hanging on by a thread, and finally what happens? I lose myself, and I really do something, and boom. Right, so now what happens? Now I'm down here. There's this rope up here, and how do I even start, right? That's before lower level tshuva. Before lower level tshuva. Then I apologize, I'm trying. And now what happens? The Alter Rebbe says, this resembles a rope that is severed and then reknotted, right? So if I'm going to tie this, and I'm going to hang, this is like, I'm going to be relying on this. I'm going to hang from a bridge, say, for this rope. I've tied it once there. There's a single knot. Okay, that's good. You trust that? I don't know. It's sort of like it could wiggle around, right? That one knot, maybe not. It's moving, right?
And it's harder to get to God because there's a barrier.
Oh, well, maybe, but we're not actually we're holding on to it. We're not traveling up it necessarily. It's a rope. I guess you could climb up. But when you climb up a rope, you want those knots to put your feet on, don't you?
Oh.
I don't know how that works. That's not where the Alter Rebbe goes on the metaphor. But I take your point. But if I tie a second knot right there, so it's a double knotted. Here we go. Now with my second knot, get nice and tight. Now if I pull there, who thinks we could pull this apart? Right? That's good.
And you have less way to go.
It's an infinite rope. So, there's infinite levels and infinite length. It's connecting me and God. So, there's not really a length, it's an infinite length. But it was severed, and now, does that look like a strong knot to you, Alex?
I think this is a trick question.
Okay, you weren't.
I'm just walking in.
It's better than the one I tied before. Let's put it that way. And now, if I were to try and find the weak spot in the rope, if I were my evil inclination, I'm like, you know what? Now Smolash is reattached to God, but I'm going to find a way to trip up. I'm going to cut with my scissors and find a spot to cut. Where am I going to cut? Am I going to cut here? Maybe. Here? Am I going to cut on this knot?
No.
Is that where you would try and cut if you wanted to find the easiest spot?
No.
Why is that?
Look how thick
It's
it is.
thicker.
It's thicker. It's doubled and redoubled. So we think, the Alter Rebbe says, when I sinned and when my rope broke, this is my shame here, and this is my weakness, and I'm going through life and I'm a flawed person because I let my rope be severed, right? And now forever that's going to be a problem for me. The Alter Rebbe says just the opposite. Because the rope was severed, and then knotted and re-knotted, doubled as we'll see, because I doubled my Torah study, I doubled even my emotional connection to it. Now that spot, that issue, so to speak, is even stronger than it was before. Even stronger. And he doesn't say it in this chapter, but it even means that sin now is a benefit. That sin was a net positive. Because at the time I did something wrong, and I hurt the world and my surroundings and my own self. But now looking back, that sin caused me to have a stronger connection to God, so it's a net positive. And you can even convert it to a mitzvah. We won't get into that now. But that's the process of higher level tshuva. Make sense? We got a close up?
Yep.
Nice. In the Alter Rebbe's words, this resembles a rope that is severed and then reknotted. שבמקום הקשר הוא כפול ומכופל.
The
Go
side
ahead.
of the
Side of the knot.
is twofold and fourfold thicker than the rest of the rope.
All right, so here we're going back again to the idea of doubled, and not just doubled, but doubled and redoubled. So 4 times thicker. And here we can see that the idea of doubling, the first doubling is tshuva tata. The first doubling is the lower level tshuva where I say, I'm sorry, I apologize, I won't do it again, sincerely. That's the first knot. And then tshuva ilah is the redoubling, is the second doubling. Right? So you have 2 types of tshuva, and tshuva ilah involves learning twice as much Torah and with emotions that are generated by the intellect. So by the time I'm done, now my rope to God, although it's a little colorful, it's got all kinds of knots in it, I'm sure, but it's actually a stronger rope. It's better than when I started, before I sinned.
So it is with
Yeah.
So it is with the rope of God's heritage.
So it is. V'zeu shamar hakatuv b'chesed v'met yichupar avon v'gomer.
Thus Scripture states, through kindness and truth is sin forgiven.
V'ein emet ela Torah v'chulu.
And there was no truth but Torah.
Right? And this is very different than saying Torah is true, right? That there's truth and Torah is part of that truth, and so we can use Torah because Torah is true. He's saying actually everything that's true in the world ultimately stems from this chokhmah of God that came down on Sinai, and that is the source of truth for every other truth in the world, and only Torah is true in this way. Right? So I might think I can get there myself. I might think I can get there by just studying philosophy. I might think I can get there by just being a good person. But ultimately, we're reconnecting with infinity. So no amount of initiative from my own part can bridge that gap. I have to rely on the chokhmah that came from God. That can leap the gap and allow me to retie my rope with infinity. You can't pull yourself up, in this case, by your own bootstraps. בעוון בית אלי ובזבח ומנחה הוא דאינו מתכפר, אבל מתכפר בתורה וגמילות חסדים, גידית בסוף פרק כמה דראש השנה.
Similarly, the statement in Scripture that the sin of the house of Eli will not be atoned by sacrifices and offerings. The Talmud comments, by sacrifices and offerings will the sin of the house of Eli not be atoned, but it will be atoned through the study of Torah and through good deeds.
As explained at the end of the first chapter of Rosh Hashanah. So here, again, another source where were I to say, very nice, very poetic, but that's not tshuva. Tshuva is about apologizing and praying and all the rest. So here he says, Eli's 2 sons were guilty of this, of spilling seed, and so it was decreed that their descendants wouldn't live for more than 20 years. That was the punishment. And yet we look at history and we see some great, great sages that came from the house of Eli and lived full lives. And that was because they did so much learning, so much studying of Torah in particular, and good deeds. And so,
Who's Eli? I'm thinking the son of Samuel, but who else is Eli?
this is not a high priest.
I don't know. I was just going to ask. who
Son
was-
of Samuel is the only Eli I can think of, but
No.
he wasn't a good guy.
Let's ask Google.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think
that's
Eli, I think Eli the high priest. I'm looking a little ignorant here, but I'm not sure which Eli this is. So now I want to skip to something we talked about, which is I forget, somebody asked a question. I forget how it was phrased.
Here.
But can you? I think the question was, can you do this on Yom Kippur? I don't remember. Somebody asked a question last week. I wish I remembered exactly how it was phrased. Now, the Alter Rebbe is very clear that you have to do lower level tshuva first, and then you do this level tshuva, and that it is consecutive, like sequential. So you can't just say, this sounds great, I'm going to do it, even though I haven't apologized for lying, for cheating, for stealing, for whatever. Right? And we have how much time? Great.
15 minutes.
However, the last Rebbe of Chabad, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, said many times that in our generation things are different than in the Alter Rebbe's generation, and certainly generations before that. And in particular, one of the differences is higher versus lower level tshuva, and how much that characterizes our time and our service, and really how accessible it is. So I want to go into, this is a maimar, which is considered a elevated, inspired lecture, so to speak, that the Rebbes would give, the Hasidic tradition. The Rebbe, when they give a maimar, it was a very ritual moment. They would be holding onto a tablecloth, that they'd sing certain nigudim beforehand, and a maimar was considered, that was a Rebbe at their peak. They were really trying to connect with their wisdom and their connection to God, and they were speaking for their Hasidim, so it was coming from somewhere else. And the Maimars are considered like the canon of Torah of Hasidus. And this was a great, great Rebbe. So I want to start. Let's start with the second paragraph. The first one talks about the parent Maimar is the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law, gave another Maimar that this one is now talking about. So it has a parent Maimar. That's not so relevant to us. But now the bitterness associated with tshuva is not relevant in our generation, the generation of Ikvesa de Meshicha. Right? So he says, normally, tshuva was crying and beating my heart and breaking my heart, and I've let God down, I've let my community down, I've let myself down. It's bitterness. That's what we know as tshuva. And he says, it's not relevant in our generation, which is the generation where this tipping point, where the Messianic era is really just, it's really upon us, right? Like we're just about to step into it, and maybe we stepped into it and don't even recognize, the footsteps are already here. For in our generation, we do not have the strength to bear the bitterness of tshuva. Right? So there's an idea of the descendants of the souls, because the souls that come down are creating one being, which is all of humanity. And it starts from the top. So the earliest souls were these great souls that lived for thousands of centuries and 1,000 years, and were totally connected to God. Here, if you're forming a being, now the end is the soles of the feet, and we're the calluses, we're the nails, we're not very sensitive souls. So there's the idea that all this fasting and this tshuva that the earlier souls did, we don't have the level to be able to do that. That's not what we're about. On the contrary, we require extensive reinforcement and support. Therefore, in our generation, and this is from 1980, I think it was 83, I didn't write down, I think 83 or 87. Therefore, in our generation, the service of tshuva should be expressed through joy. This also applies to the recitation of Tehillim with a broken heart referred to in the above-mentioned Maamar. So here the Rebbe is saying, I know it says in the Tanya that first you do low-level tshuva, and that's the key for everybody, and then higher-level tshuva, that's a special thing. But he says, no, that has changed for a number of reasons. A, we're basically at that tipping point. And B, the people that are here in this generation, they need a lot of support. They're not high-level souls, they're lower-level souls, so really they should be doing this second kind of tshuva. That should be the relevant tshuva for this generation. And then I'll skip the next two paragraphs. He explains that there's a saying, tracht gut, wird sein gut, think good and it'll be good. And there's a story about the Frierdiker Rebbe, about somebody's health, and he says essentially, if it's about physical health, it's also about spiritual health. And if the Rebbe taught it, that means that it applies to everybody. So that would take a little explanation, but a little Hasidic backup that this idea of positivity is actually now the defining approach for our generation, not negativity. So now we'll go to now we're speaking. Let's look at now we're speaking. So now we're speaking about an event that actually occurred and not theory, this story. And originally it was the Tzemach Tzedek that the Frierdiker was relating the story. A directive to be applied in practice. And the instance in question involved a person's health. From that we can be certain it applies to spiritual health, since the matter was publicized by the head of our generation and has already been quoted in print. It is evident that it serves as a directive for each and every Jew. So this idea, to summarize that, this idea that what's relevant in our generation is tshuva with joy, higher level tshuva, applies to every single person. Otherwise, the Tzemach Tzedek and the Frierdiker Rebbe would not have publicized it so much for us to know about and hear. From all the above, it is clear that our divine service must be characterized by joy. Right? So now he's going on a limb and he's saying, I know it says in the Tanya, I know the previous Rebbe said, lower level tshuva first, but in our generation, our tshuva must be characterized by joy. And once he says this, and he said this many times, by the way, now he's really taking on his shoulders that we here at Temple Israel can confidently say, okay, maybe I don't keep all the traditional mitzvahs. Maybe I'm not a perfect Beinoni. So maybe this chapter is just theoretical. But no, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to say, because in this generation, that the Rebbe of this system said, no, now you can just go ahead and do higher level tshuva and do tshuva with joy. We certainly can take that practice on. That even if we haven't, dotted all our I's and crossed all our T's, so to speak, that we can go ahead and learn Torah with intellectually generated love and awe, and that not only has value and is legit, but is the defining type of tshuva of our generation anyways. Thus, and so here he refers to Geras HaTshuva that we're learning, the Tanya, which is the name of a gateway of atonement, explains the intent of the verse, my sins are always before me, this is your verse, is not that one should be sad and downcast. God forbid. God forbid we should be sad and downcast at all times. Instead, the intent of the term negdi, translated as before me, is from afar. Right? So, to get back to our conversation, yes, King David always remembered that he had sinned, but in this case, negdi doesn't mean like, oh, I'm a terrible person. It means, let's keep that in mind, right? I once got tripped up, I still could, but I'm going to be joyful that now I'm one with God, but it's not gone, right? It's floating there. It's an avatar like 50 feet in front of me in my mind, if you like. Yeah? As indicated by the verse that follows, let me hear joy and gladness. Right? So that now the Rebbe is bringing in, when you keep your sins afar in front of you, now tshuva is characterized by joy and gladness, as David said. i.e. immediately after a very brief moment of bitterness. A broken and contrite heart, that's the moment of bitterness. But there should be a full measure of joy and gladness, as King David, the composer of sweet songs of Israel, states, "Let me hear joy and gladness." Right?
It's funny that I brought up King David. I didn't know we were going to do this.
Yeah, it's very funny. Moreover, it is explained in Igeris Tshuva, the text we're studying, that tshuva, which stems from bitterness, is tshuva tata'ah. This should be familiar, lower level tshuva, the lower rung of tshuva. In contrast, tshuva that is characterized by happiness is considered tshuva ilah, the higher rung of tshuva. Now, and here, this is just Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the last Chabad Rebbe. This is him now, right? And it speaks to me. Now, after all the, how do you pronounce this? Travails? How do you say it in English?
That sounds good.
Travails, is that what we say?
That sounds good.
After all the travails and suffering that our people have experienced in our generation, the generation of Yikvesa de Mashiach, the entire Jewish people are on the highest and most sublime spiritual level, for, as our sages teach, suffering purges the blemishes of sin. Suffering purges those, refining, purifying, and elevating. Thus, when our people's spiritual stature is seen in the context of their recent history, it is apparent that the higher rung of tshuva characterized by joy, is relevant to them. So this is, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Chabad Rebbe we've talked about, probably one of the most influential, I would say he was, the most influential Jewish leader of the 20th century, right? And is known for absolute positivity, right? Always looking always seeing the best in things, always saying, this, we're heading towards something good. This is going to work out. That was his motto, unbelievably. And yet, he lost much of his family to the Holocaust. This was someone from that generation who was right in the middle of it. His whole world was destroyed. Much of his family was lost. He was under Nazi occupation in France. He escaped. You and I probably have met many people that went through this and were broken or bitter or looked at the world as out to get them. There's a few rare people that came out of that with a sense of positivity, of that the human spirit can triumph over anything. But imagine one of the most positive, emblematically positive leaders in the history of Judaism was someone who was a Holocaust survivor. And here he's saying, this is why, right? No one can see that there was purpose in the Holocaust. You'd have to be a Nazi to think there was purpose in the Holocaust, that it happened for a reason. God forbid. However, from the point of view of what we learned, that when I suffer, that has a cleansing effect on my soul. And when I go through trials, big or small, that is actually doing kapara, is scrubbing my soul. Think of what that means for the Jews that we survived the Holocaust. And think of what it means for us now about the spiritual level we're on and about what our work is. And from his perspective, how can you look at any Jewish person alive today and say they're guilty of anything? Right? After what we've been through, after what we survived, after what we stood for, after what we rebuilt, after what our generations went through, now you're going to say that a Jew sinned? How can you even go there, right? We're all at such a high spiritual level. Basically, this generation, the Rebbe is saying, is about tshuva ilah, and we should consider this our raison d'etre, our defining type of tshuva for this generation. So I find it so beautiful that someone that really came from that recognizes the quality that puts to our generation. And one last piece. This is real. This is lofty stuff for Reform Synagogue. So hold on to your. I don't know. Hold on to your
Is
kippah.
he saying that gives us a pass?
Say it again.
Is he
Yeah,
giving
it gives
us
us a pass for sure.
Giving
Yeah,
us a pass.
yeah. Before the Holocaust, so I wasn't spending 4 hours a day learning Talmud. If I grew up in Poland where there's yeshivas and there's a tradition, and my father learned and my grandfather learned and okay, maybe you could say I'm guilty, and then I do a sin. Well, I should know better, right? I'm living in but after the Holocaust, for real? Now you're gonna take me to task for that I didn't learn enough. Look what we went through. So yes, if there's a pass, I'd say the history of the 20th century is that. There is a further point, as explained in Igeris Tshuva. This text again, it is desirable to experience the lower rung of tshuva that stems from bitterness at least once a week, right? So, and this is in a chapter that's coming up, right? Where are you? Chapter 10, next chapter. So we're not going to leave tshuva, the lower level tshuva, completely gone. We want to do it once a week. When? Thursday night, right? And the optimum time for the experience is before Shabbos, i.e. on Thursday night. Now, within the context of the history of the world as a whole, it is close to the end of the 6th millennium. So we've touched on this, and we don't often talk about it in the Reformed community, but cosmically, Judaism sees the world as everything is in sevens, right? So the week is in sevens because 7 is just a cycle, it's perfection, right? There has to be 7 days of the week. That goes through every quality, right? And then there's the cycles that lead to the 70th year is called the Jubilee, right? So you got 70 years, which makes a Jubilee, and everything is happening in sevens. And emotionally, we have 7 emotions, and we've gone through that. We also have 7 millennia. So time is organized into 7 millennia because each millennia, just like each day of the week, represents one quality. That's why God took 7 days to make the world, not because God needed 7 days. And we'll see, there's sages talk about how a day for God is 1,000 years. Or that's from the Psalms, we'll see.
But he didn't take 7 days to create the world.
Pardon me?
He didn't take 7 days.
Well, 6 days and then Shabbos. So the whole process, including Shabbos, took, the world was created in 6 days, but you need that 7th day because that's a quality that wasn't there when God was creating. That's Shabbos, right? So if there are 7 millennia in history, we know, being students of Kabbalah, that each one of those millennia will reflect the quality of that day. And you can go through, actually, we could do a whole class on this and go through each millennia, and you can see how, creation is chesed and so on, and each millennia really is characterized in history by that aspect of the 7 qualities that we know about. But where are we now? The year is 5783, right? So if history is 6,000 years until Shabbos, then where are we in those 6 days of history that are passing so far? What time of day of the week are we at if we're 5783?
Thursday? No.
The end of the 6th millennium?
End of the 6th day. 6 days what? Not Thursday. Right. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is 5, Friday 6. And Shabbos is 7. So we have 217 years left in the 6th millennia. So we're like 4/5 of the way through the 24 hours of Friday. So what time is it? Probably it's like, can you do the math there? It's Friday afternoon. And what is it like Friday afternoon when you're getting ready for Shabbos? What's the feeling?
Freedom.
Joy.
I don't know about you. I don't feel freedom Friday afternoon. I feel like, oh my God, I didn't finish the chillent and I got to get my outlines printed and do I have my clothes ready and is Jen in town or out of town? And I'm rushing. It's exciting, but it's not freedom. But it's a sense of speeding up to get ready for Shabbos. Do you feel like the world is revving? Do you feel like the last century there's been like a speeding up? Is that
Definitely.
for sure?
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's crazy what's happening. So that makes sense. But also, in terms of Shabbos being the quality of tshuva ilah, and you're already entering the mindset on Friday afternoon, the Rebbe is saying, when you look at history, you look at us being on the Friday afternoon of the 7 total millennia that Kabbalah says is spiritually there as time, now it makes sense that actually we're in Friday afternoon. We should already be in the mindset of Shabbos. We should already be in the mindset of tshuva ilah. And the rest of the stuff we leave behind. Like everything's been scrubbed, the silverware is polished, the table's set, we're rushing to put the last little bits in place. And our mind should already be on Shabbos, which means tshuva ilah, which means now tshuva with joy. And if I think I'm not good enough, and look at my failings, and it says, you know what? We've been through such terrible things. Don't worry. The Rebbe says, just go ahead with tshuva ilah, even though in the past that wasn't the case. Now in our generation, that absolutely is the case. And the positive should be our focus.
So that's why they think the coming of the Messiah is near.
Yes. And that's always been, by the way, a key thing that Jews believe, right? I know it's something that we, even though Reform Judaism technically believes in the Messianic era, we're sort of, we're a little arm's length from it at times. But we should know that if you say, what is a Jew? The Rambam said that's one of the things that a Jew has to believe, that defines a Jew, that the Mashiach is coming, that I'm waiting for Mashiach.
In the seventh millennium.
No, that's the latest. Mashiach could come anytime. So they've been hoping and waiting for all of history, but Kabbalistically, there's no way Mashiach can't come by, the seventh millennium, because that's now.
By the end of the seventh millennium.
Yeah. So if in 213 years Mashiach hasn't come, we're gonna have a problem.
So the Mashiach is coming in the seventh millennium, not the end of the seventh.
Sometime in the seventh.
The whole seventh millennia is now the time in history where we pass that tipping point. Now the world is going to be in a state of Shabbos, where we don't look around and see different people in a room. We look around and we see one general soul with all these reflections of it, and we recognize that there's only God here, and that's the reality of that millennium. So that has to happen by that year, but it should happen earlier, right? Because it's up to us to bring it at an appropriate time, which is today.
Are you saying our souls will rise up?
I'm saying we'll all have the perspective that there's nothing here except God. So that'll actually, even physical reality will be permeated with that awareness, right? So if you've ever had one of those liminal kind of out of nowhere moments where there's another oneness that takes over, and you recognize that who you think you are is not really the whole picture, that'll be all the time. Basically, it'll be like you're standing at Sinai, but all the time, and in physical reality, while you're walking around picking a potato and earning a living. That'll be our reality 24/7. We got a taste of it at Sinai, and that'll be the whole seventh millennium. So that's what Reformed Judaism, by the way, works towards, is the Messianic era. That's that. So God willing, we should all help to bring it sooner than in 213 years.
Is it only for the Jews?
No, it's everything. Everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, we did learn that for us, each Jewish soul is a general soul that has 600,000 sparks. And so each one of those souls is connected to the rest of the world, and that includes all of humanity and every living thing, and even inanimate things. So ultimately, God had in mind, I want someone to learn Torah, I want someone to do mitzvahs, and I'm creating a whole world for that. But the whole world gets elevated. All right, let's finish. Now, right? Within the context of history of the world as a whole, it is close to the end of the sixth millennium, following the conception that the day of the Holy One, blessed be He, is a millennium, which we see now. That idea that a day for God is a millennium comes from Tehillim. I'd have to research exactly which line, but that's from Tehillim. So we are drawing close to the end of Friday. As we said, this is 4/5 of the way through the 6-day Friday. It's not merely early on Friday. It is certainly not Thursday night. It is late on Friday, near the end of the day, very close to Shabbos. So we did our tshuva ila, our tshuva tata, our lower tshuva last night, Thursday night, which was 800 years ago, right? So that's done, and now it's late on Friday. So the Rebbe is saying it's not the time for lower level tshuva anymore. If so, it is obvious that the divine service of this era must be carried out in a spirit of happiness that accompanies the higher rung of tshuva. So not even it's appropriate, but now he's saying you have to do this. Everybody has to try tshuva ilah, because we're Friday afternoon. Like, just get into Shabbos, just go for it. Like, don't worry about the rest of the week that happened. I hope that puts into perspective this idea. We now know how we can reconnect our rope to God. We know about the quality of that spot, that it's higher than before. And we know that although technically we've learned that you have to do a lower level tshuva first, and I certainly encourage people to do that it's advised at this time in history for us to also leap and do higher level tshuva and not and flow with really the joy and the excitement of this time in history as we approach the tipping point we're all working for. Wonderful to have you here. We'll see you again on Gateway of Atonement. Any questions, as I said, please put them in the comments or be in touch directly. It's been a pleasure learning with you.